So we're starting our unit on macroeconomics, and we're trying to understand things in the aggregate. And that word means the combining totals of everything. So when economists in macroeconomics talk about aggregates, they're talking about combining everything, like everyone's happiness, everyone's demand, everyone's supply. And so that's what they mean when they say things like aggregate demand. We're looking for totals, and we're looking for averages, and we're looking for things that are across groups of people. And the best place to start are countries because they have the best data. Okay? So the first thing we need to understand is how do we measure the productiveness of a country? Because as we saw in our crash course videos, productiveness really matters when it comes to the wealth and health and happiness of a country. So we're going to start with the measurement called GDP. And this stands for Gross Domestic Product. Now, to break those words down, the word gross actually means total. Okay? So this is the total domestic. Domestic means in the home or inside your house. And so this is going to be inside your country. Gross domestic product. So what is the total amount of stuff that we make inside our country? And what you want to put down is it's in 1 year. Okay? It's in 1 year's time. So what do we do in 1 year's time? How much stuff? What's the total that we make inside our country in 1 year? That is gross domestic product. And what we're looking at there is the formula for that. This is a very simplistic formula and has got a lot of holes in it. And we'll talk about those. But we've got to start off somewhere. And so this is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So that's where we're going to start here. And this is the formula we're going to explain. C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Now, what I've done is I've taken our formula and I've put it running down the side here, and we're going to talk about each of those variables going forward. Okay? So the C in this part of our GDP formula stands for consumption. And consumption consists of consumer goods. So you got to rewind all the way back to chapter 1 when we talked about consumer goods versus capital goods. Consumer goods are things that are made and then they're gone. They are consumed. So a can of Mountain Dew, you drink it, it's gone, it's been consumed. Whereas a capital good over here is something that is used to make other goods, like factories and computers and things like that. So most of our economy in America is consumer goods. In fact, 70% of our economy are consumer goods. And so that means that Americans consume a fantastic amount of stuff. Now, if you care about sustainability and resources and things like that, then that's probably not a good sign. If most of your economy is dominated by just, consuming, destroying things, using resources and using them up, that's what that C is, okay? So you'll see a lot of economists talk about how you got to jumpstart the consumption. You'll see a lot of government programs designed to get money out to people so they'll just buy stuff. And then, I don't know, it's mostly for food, big screen TVs, things that are consumption items. And so remember when we talk about these others, 70% is just consuming things. All right. So next one there, we've got I, which stands for investment. And you need to understand that this is the Adam Smith way of talking about investment. He's talking about investing in capital goods. He called it capital stock, but what we know it is as a capital good. And a capital good is like a factory or a computer or a cow. If you remember way back to chapter 1, factories are goods that make other goods. Computers, you don't just consume the computer. You don't pull it apart and throw it away. You use it to do other things. A forklift is used to do other things. A movie theater is used to show movies and sell it. These are all capital goods. You know, cows was Adam Smith's example because the cow produces more little cows, okay? And it produces milk, and it's like a factory. It's producing something, and so those are known as capital goods. They are things that produce other things. So when a society invests in factories, then they're producing more things, and that creates more ability to consume. So that's why Adam Smith called it investment. Now, what causes a problem here is that people think of them as like stocks and bonds. Well, those might be investments in modern terminology, but not in this terminology. Because what does a stock produce? I mean, it is a piece of paper that says you own part of a company. And then I'll trade my piece of paper to someone else for a higher price if they think they want it, or a lower price if I can't sell it for a higher price, and I want to get rid of it. The price might go up and down as is investing your money into it, but it doesn't actually produce anything. And remember, GDP is gross domestic product. We've got to have a product here. So trading pieces of paper like stocks and bonds, that's not part of the equation. All right? Next one we come to is the G, which is government. And that stands for all the things that government buys. So improvements on a road, like fixing up I-84, that's government. Helping out to get a park going, buying an aircraft carrier, delivering the mail. These are goods and services that the government buys. So if the government spends money, they lump it in as G. Okay? So C plus I plus G can be government spending. Now, we have to be very clear about this, and this is an interesting concept. It is not transfer payments. So what our government does is they take money from one group of people and they give it to another group of people. And those people who received it think, yeah, I got more money, so the government must have spent money on me. But that's not the case, because you've got another group of people over here that lost money to put it over here. So you had this situation and now you have that situation. It hasn't changed the total. You've just transferred money from one person to the other, but nothing was actually produced. You're not getting anything, and it's not making the world a better place per se. It's not making the world more productive. There's nothing more being done. So think about a lot of those things that the government does, say like Social Security. We take money out of people's paychecks. We give it to someone who's retired. What did we get for it? Well, we got retirees that will vote for the politician who came up with this. I mean, that's the only production here. For example, Mr. Haight has $10 in this example here, and they come out with a tax that says you must give 40% to some kind of welfare program. Okay? So now my $10 in my pocket becomes $6, and someone else gets my $4. Well, they're happy with the 4. I'm unhappy because I've lost 4. But have we gained anything? And the answer is no, because the total is still just $10. All right? The total is still just $10. What we had at the beginning was 10 and nothing, and now we have 6 and 4. But we're not a wealthier society. We're just a distributed society. That's all. Okay? So this doesn't actually affect GDP. Okay, now here's where the big concept comes in here. When you look at this as overall government spending, you run across something in economics called the crowding out effect. So you have to ask yourself, where does the government get its money? And the simple answer is from the taxpayers. Now, if you didn't have to pay any taxes, what would you have done with your money? What is your opportunity cost? So if you didn't have the taxes, what would you have done? you would have spent it on food, gasoline, a new car, things like that. You would have spent it on something that's productive in your life, like buying a rental house is what I would do, okay? And so you either spend it here in investment or you spend it here in consumption, and mostly in consumption. So when the government spends taxpayers' money, are they adding to the GDP? See, again, this is a lot like the transfer payment that's not supposed to be included. I would have a hard time arguing that G is somehow part of this equation, because what happens is G, every dollar that is spent by the government is a dollar not spent on capital goods and consumer goods, consumption and investment. See, if the government shrank the amount of money it spent, then I and C would grow bigger. That money that the government spends or wouldn't spend would then be put in these, and they would be increased. So for our equation to balance, it makes sense to put the G here. But when you think about how this relationship works, it's really not productive. Because the government buying aircraft carriers is not the same as putting in a microchip factory. That microchip factory is going to be productive way down the line. It's going to create jobs, it's going to create benefits, it's going to create all kinds of things over and over again, year after year after it's been purchased. What does an aircraft carrier do? It actually sucks money out of the system year after year. So it's a little bit of a misnomer to say, well, if we just buy 30 aircraft carriers, then our GDP goes way up. Yeah, on the mathematical side, your GDP goes up, but not your living standards. North Korea has a really big army, and the people are starving outside of the army. So understand that the more you increase the G, you're shrinking the C and the I. And that's what happened to a lot of communist countries. They went all in on the military, and they basically destroyed themselves. Communist China was going bankrupt. Soviet Union had to declare bankruptcy because of this. It really wasn't a good thing. So keep that in mind. Just because you want to bump the GDP doesn't mean, then government can just spend all kinds of money, because what's going to happen is the crowding out effect. If the government sucks all the money out of the economy, then these two shrink in response. Okay? So something to understand there. Transfer payments don't count, but maybe this whole G right here is just one big transfer payment. Okay? So think about that. It's one of the concepts economists argue about. All right. Next one here, you've got exports minus imports. This, again, is another one that people have a lot of problems with. I certainly do. Because it's sort of a leftover idea from mercantilism. Back in the 1600s, the mercantilists believed that all they had to do was go to the New World, form colonies, take the resources, and ship it to their factories back in England, France, Spain, and Germany, make nice stuff, and then sell it to the colonists that they took the resources from, and the home country would just have more wealth. So the idea was that if you could export more than you import, you would increase the amount of gold in your coffers and you would be wealthier. So you notice that export's a plus, but an import is subtraction. So that's the situation there. Okay? But that's an idea left over from mercantilists. When does this actually matter? This thing right here. Okay? So you got to think this through. The United States has a trade deficit, and every year it gets bigger. This thing right here, this section, is reported in the news as a trade deficit. So we sell the world cherries and they send us Toyotas, and so this one over here, imports, is much higher than the exports, and so we have a trade deficit, the difference between them. Does it matter? what we're doing is we are sending pieces of paper with a dollar bill on it to another country, and they are sending us Toyotas. Who's getting the better deal? Do you want the cars, or do you want a big stacks of pieces of paper? You want the cars, all right? So you need to understand that sending pieces of paper over to someone else sounds like a pretty good deal. I mean, I don't really understand why they take them. So that's a question in and of itself we'll have to cover later. But let me tell you a little story here, and we'll see if we can get the analogy. You live here in the Dalles, but most of you have probably been to Portland before. And when you went to Portland, it was to do something like go shopping, to go out to eat, to go to a concert, to go to a Blazer game. And so you spent money in Portland, but you're from the Dalles. So you have a trade deficit between the Dalles to Portland. You have spent more money in Portland, and you have not earned any money there. You have not, the Portland people are not buying your exports. Whatever job you're doing, it's highly unlikely. And so you have a trade deficit between you and the Dalles and Portland. But it doesn't matter, because if you earn the money in the Dalles and you spent it in Portland and got the stuff you wanted, sure, you have a trade deficit, but you earned the money. So what does it matter? Okay? So if we as Americans, if we are productive and we earn the money, and then we go spend it somewhere else, who cares? All right? Now, here's the other side of the story. What would happen if you took your parent or guardian's credit card and you went to Portland and bought a bunch of stuff? You bought $500 on their credit card. And it wasn't until a month later that they read the bill and went, where'd this $500 charge come from? And like, oh, that was me. Okay? You're probably thinking you'd be in a lot of trouble. But now it matters, doesn't it? So you didn't have the 500, but you used the credit card to get the stuff you wanted. And so for a month, for a while, you're pretty happy. You got the stuff you wanted. You didn't have to pay for it. But then the bill comes due, both physically and then metaphorically. You're going to be in a lot of trouble. All right? Same thing with the United States. If we borrow money to then buy things overseas, now this becomes really important. Because if we're borrowing money to buy this, then that means in the future our bill will come due, and we're going to have to pay for this by reducing our consumption. Okay? So just like in my example with Portland, if your parents found out that you had charged $500 on their credit card, they would be like, oh, you're paying this back. And so they're going to make you work, they're going to make you pay, and you're going to have to pay it back plus interest, because that's what happens when you take someone's credit card, okay? Same thing with the United States. If we ring up a credit card, $27 trillion, we have to pay that back plus interest. And so that's going to be a reduction in consumption and investment in the future. These things are going to shrink because we borrowed money to buy stuff from other countries. So, for your notes there, when does it matter? If you use debt to buy imports, it matters because it's debt. If you earn the money to buy imports, it doesn't matter. You worked for it. It's earned money, and you're spending it on things that make you happy. Okay? So that's the real problem here. Not that the import-export thing necessarily is an issue, but how do you buy those things? Okay? I mean, it's great if you can export your stuff, but you're working. You're going to have to work to sell those things to another country. And why do you work so hard to sell those things? So you can get money, and then you can buy stuff. So it's the stuff that matters and how you get it that matters, not this equation right here at the bottom. So this one, exports minus imports, is really tough. And besides, as we learned in chapter 4, you put a Toyota plant in Kentucky. Is it an export? Is it an import? Like some of the money goes back to Japan for Toyota, but the workers were Americans, and the plant pays property tax in America, and the cars roll off the line in America and get sold to Americans. It's tough to tell, isn't it? Like what percentage of it is an import and what percentage is domestically made. So we leave that up to economists to try and argue about, but things are getting a little fuzzy with the export-import thing. It's a leftover from the 1600s. What we really need to understand is the nuance of the debt. Is it debt that's buying this, or is it production that's buying it? And that makes a big difference. All right? Okay. So hopefully you can understand some of these things about GDP. These are the basics, and it's now a good time to stop for questions. We're going to point out the flaws and the good and bad things about GDP here. So that's in our next issue.